Did you know that the DNA of modern Italians holds secrets that stretch back tens of thousands of years? It's a fascinating story that begins with the arrival of modern humans to the Italian peninsula during the Upper Paleolithic, nearly 34,000 years ago. From the rugged caves of Fumane to the ancient shores of Sardinia, these early inhabitants laid the foundation for a genetic tapestry that would become one of the most unique in Europe. But what makes Italian DNA so extraordinary isn't just its age. It's the way geography and history combined to shape the genes of those who lived here. Think about it. Italy sits at the very heart of the Mediterranean, a crossroads for countless civilizations, migrations, and even invasions. For thousands of years, the Italian peninsula has been a meeting point for different peoples, each leaving their genetic imprint behind. So, what does this mean for modern Italians? It means their DNA is like a living time capsule, one that tells the story of Europe's ancient hunter-gatherers, the rise of farming, and the dramatic movements of people during the Bronze and Iron Ages. But it also reveals connections to distant lands, North Africa, the Middle East, and even Central Asia, brought by traders, conquerors, and settlers. In today's video, we're not just uncovering the genetic history of Italy. We're exploring why the Italian DNA is so unique, so complex, and so beautifully tied to the story of humanity itself. Stay tuned as we delve deep into the incredible journey of Italian genetics. To truly understand why Italian DNA is so unique, we need to start at the very beginning, when the first modern humans set foot on the Italian peninsula. Over 30,000 years ago, during the Upper Paleolithic period, early humans migrated to this region, leaving behind some of the oldest traces of modern human life in Europe. One such discovery, the remains found in the Fumane cave near Verona, dates back an astonishing 34,000 years. These early settlers were part of the Aurignacian culture, known for its advanced tools, art, and survival techniques. But Italy's story doesn't end there. By the Magdalene period, humans began spreading across the Mediterranean, and the island of Sardinia became home to settlers from the Pyrenees. This early connection between Sardinia and Western Europe helped shape the distinct genetic profile that still sets the island apart from mainland Italy today. Fast forward to the Neolithic period, and Italy underwent a revolutionary transformation. Farming arrived from the east, brought by people who carried the genes of the first European farmers. These Neolithic settlers didn't just introduce agriculture, they built some of the earliest villages, crafted pottery, and began using copper tools. Their arrival left a profound genetic mark on the Italian population, one that still persists in modern DNA studies. And then came the Beaker culture, spreading from Central and Western Europe into northern Italy, Sicily, and Sardinia during the late Neolithic and early Bronze Age. These people introduced new technologies, burial practices, and cultural innovations. DNA evidence reveals that they contributed to the genetic makeup of Italians, blending their ancestry with that of the earlier farmers and hunter-gatherers. But the real game-changer in shaping Italian DNA was the Bronze Age. Around this time, a group known as the Proto-Villanovans appeared in central and northern Italy. They were part of the Urnfield culture, which introduced the practice of cremating the dead, a custom that originated in Central Europe. The Proto-Villanovans brought with them the use of iron, marking the dawn of the Iron Age and laying the groundwork for many of Italy's later civilizations. Even more intriguing is the genetic history of Sardinia. While much of Italy was absorbing new influences during the Bronze Age, Sardinia remained remarkably isolated. Its Nuragic civilization thrived with minimal outside interference, preserving a unique genetic profile that still stands out today. Sardinians are genetically closer to Europe's ancient Neolithic farmers than almost any other population on the continent. These early foundations of Italian DNA, shaped by waves of migration and innovation, laid the groundwork for the rich genetic diversity we see today. But this is just the beginning. The story of Italian genetics only grows more fascinating as we move into the Iron Age and beyond. As we move into the Bronze and Iron Ages, Italy's genetic story takes on even more complexity, with new migrations and cultural shifts leaving lasting imprints on its people. These periods marked the arrival of significant groups and technologies that would shape Italy's future civilizations. During the late Bronze Age, the Proto-Villanovan culture emerged in central and northern Italy. These people were part of the broader Urnfield culture, originating in Central Europe, and are identified by their distinctive burial practice, cremating the dead and placing their ashes in urns. This Central European influence wasn't just cultural, it also brought a new genetic component to the Italian peninsula. Studies reveal that these proto-Villanovans carried steppe-related ancestry, which had arrived in Europe during earlier migrations. This genetic signature, shared with other Indo-European-speaking populations, would spread across Italy during the Bronze and Iron Ages. But the Bronze Age wasn't just about the proto-Villanovans. In Sardinia, the Neuralgic civilization reached its height. Isolated from many external influences, the Neuralgic people developed a unique culture centered on their iconic stone towers, called nuraghi. Genetically, Sardinians remained distinct, preserving their strong connection to Europe's early Neolithic farmers. Even today, Sardinians stand out as genetic outliers, carrying some of the most ancient DNA in Europe. The Iron Age, which began around 1200 BCE, brought even more diversity to Italy's genetic landscape. This was the era of the Italic tribes, groups like the Latins, Samnites, and Umbrians, who brought their Indo-European languages and cultural practices. These tribes had genetic ties to the steppe ancestry brought by earlier migrations, blending it with the existing genetic components from Neolithic and Bronze Age populations. In northern Italy, another group made their mark during the Iron Age, the Celts. Migrating south from Central Europe, the Celts introduced new cultural and genetic elements to the region. Their presence is still reflected in the DNA of modern northern Italians, who show genetic similarities to other populations of Western and Central Europe. And then there were the Etruscans, who flourished in central Italy during this period. While their language and culture were distinct from the Indo-European-speaking Italic tribes, genetic studies show that the Etruscans were not fundamentally different from their neighbors. They shared the same mix of Neolithic, steppe, and Bronze Age ancestry, suggesting a long period of genetic continuity in the region. This fascinating blend of cultural uniqueness and genetic similarity makes the Etruscans a vital piece of Italy's genetic puzzle. Finally, the Iron Age also saw the arrival of Greek colonists in southern Italy and Sicily. Known as Magna Graecia, these colonies left a significant genetic legacy in the region. DNA studies show that modern southern Italians and Sicilians share substantial genetic overlap with Greeks, underscoring the lasting impact of this period of colonization. The Bronze and Iron Ages were transformative times for Italy. They added new layers of diversity to an already rich genetic foundation, blending the influences of Indo-European migrations, local developments, and Mediterranean connections. As we move forward in time, the story only becomes more intricate, with the rise of Rome and the sweeping changes brought by the Roman Empire. Italy's unique position at the heart of the Mediterranean made it a hub for some of the most influential civilizations in history. During the Iron Age, this central role in Mediterranean trade and migration began to profoundly shape its genetic and cultural landscape. One of the most significant influences came from the Greeks. Starting in the 8th century BCE, Greek settlers established colonies along the southern coasts of Italy and in Sicily, in what would later be called Magna Graecia, or Great Greece. These colonies, including cities like Naples, Syracuse, and Tarentum, became centers of Greek culture, language, and trade. But their impact wasn't just cultural. Genetic studies show that the ancient Greeks left a lasting imprint on the DNA of southern Italians and Sicilians. Today, people from these regions carry genetic markers that link them closely to modern Greeks, far more so than to populations from central or northern Italy. Around the same time, Phoenicians from the eastern Mediterranean also arrived on Italian shores, primarily settling in western Sicily. Known for their seafaring prowess and extensive trade networks, the Phoenicians brought influences from regions as far away as North Africa and the Levant. While their genetic contribution was smaller compared to the Greeks, traces of their presence can still be found in the DNA of Sicilian populations. Meanwhile, in central Italy, the Etruscan civilization was reaching its peak. The Etruscans remain one of the most enigmatic cultures in Italy's history, and their origins have long been debated. Were they locals who developed independently, or did they migrate from Anatolia or the Aegean? Modern genetic studies suggest a fascinating answer. The Etruscans were largely autochthonous to central Italy, sharing a genetic profile remarkably similar to their Latin neighbors. Despite speaking a pre-Indo-European language, they carried steppe-related ancestry alongside traces of Neolithic farming and Bronze Age admixture. This genetic blend highlights how deeply interconnected the Mediterranean world was, even before the rise of Rome. In northern Italy, Another group was making its presence felt, the Celts. During the Iron Age, Celtic tribes from Central Europe migrated into the northern plains, bringing with them their culture and genetic heritage. These migrations added yet another layer to the complex genetic makeup of Italy, particularly in regions like Lombardy and the Veneto. As for Sardinia, its story remained unique. Unlike mainland Italy, Sardinia was relatively isolated from these Mediterranean influences. While the rest of Italy absorbed Greek, Phoenician, and Celtic elements, the genetic profile of Sardinians remained rooted in the Neolithic, preserving a connection to Europe's earliest farmers. Together, these Mediterranean influences shaped the diverse genetic landscape of Italy. From the Greek colonies of the south to the Etruscan cities of the center and the Celtic tribes of the north, the peninsula became a patchwork of cultures and peoples. Each group brought its own genetic signature, adding to the rich tapestry that would define the Italian DNA. But this was just the beginning. With the rise of Rome, Italy would become the epicenter of an empire that spanned continents, bringing in people from across the known world. The genetic story of Italy was about to become even more intricate. When we think of ancient Rome, we often picture sprawling cities, monumental architecture, and a vast empire that stretched from Britain to the Middle East. But what often goes unnoticed is the profound genetic impact of Rome's rise to power. As the Roman Empire expanded, so did the diversity of its people, transforming Italy into one of the most genetically dynamic regions in the ancient world. The Roman Republic and later the Empire were magnets for migration. At its height, Rome was the epicenter of a sprawling network of trade, conquest, and cultural exchange. The city of Rome itself, with its million-plus inhabitants, was the most populous metropolis of its time, drawing people from every corner of the empire. Archaeological DNA evidence from ancient Roman burials shows how dramatically the genetic landscape of the city evolved. During the Republican period, the population of Rome was largely similar to modern northern and central Italians. But as the empire expanded, the genetic makeup of the city shifted. By the imperial period, the people of Rome had a genetic profile resembling that of modern populations from the eastern Mediterranean, places like Greece, Cyprus, and the Levant. This transformation was driven by waves of immigration, as people from across the empire were drawn to its wealth and opportunities. Soldiers, traders, slaves, and freedmen from North Africa, the Middle East, and Western Asia all contributed to this melting pot of cultures and genes. Interestingly, these genetic shifts weren't limited to Rome itself. The Roman Empire's vast reach meant that people and ideas flowed freely across its provinces. In northern Italy, for example, there was an influx of genetic markers from Central Europe, likely due to the recruitment of soldiers and settlers from regions like Gaul and Germania. Southern Italy and Sicily, on the other hand, saw increased genetic contributions from the eastern Mediterranean and North Africa, reflecting the region's role as a bridge between Europe and the broader Mediterranean world. But genetic diversity in Italy didn't end with the fall of Rome. In late antiquity, as the empire crumbled, new groups entered the peninsula. Germanic tribes like the Visigoths and Lombards left their mark on northern and central Italy, while in the south, Byzantine and Arab influences introduced additional layers of genetic variation. In fact, DNA studies of ancient Roman skeletons have detected a noticeable shift toward Northern European ancestry during the late imperial and medieval periods, likely tied to these Germanic migrations. Despite these changes, what's remarkable is the level of genetic continuity that persisted in Italy throughout this period. While the Roman Empire brought unprecedented diversity to the region, it also helped unify its population through shared cultural practices and intermarriage. By the time the empire fell, the Italian genetic landscape was already a complex blend of ancient hunter-gatherers, Neolithic farmers, Bronze Age pastoralists, and the diverse peoples of the Mediterranean world. The Roman Empire's impact on Italy's DNA is a testament to the interconnectedness of the ancient world. It turned Italy into a crossroads of civilizations, where the genes of countless peoples converged to create a truly unique genetic tapestry. But the story doesn't end here. In the centuries that followed, new migrations and influences would continue to shape the DNA of modern Italians, adding even more depth to this fascinating genetic legacy. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE, Italy entered a period of significant upheaval. The early Middle Ages were marked by waves of invasions and migrations that would leave a lasting imprint on the DNA of the Italian peninsula. As power shifted and new kingdoms emerged, Italy became a melting pot once again, blending ancient legacies with new influences. One of the first major groups to arrive were the Ostrogoths, a Germanic tribe that established a kingdom in Italy during the 5th and 6th centuries. While their numbers were relatively small compared to the existing population, their genetic contributions can still be detected in modern Italians, particularly in the north. Following the Ostrogoths came the Lombards, another Germanic group that left an even greater genetic impact. The Lombards ruled much of northern and central Italy for centuries, and their influence is reflected in the increased presence of northern European genetic markers in these regions. In southern Italy and Sicily, a different story unfolded. During the early Middle Ages, the Byzantine Empire retained control over parts of the region, bringing with it a continued connection to the Eastern Mediterranean. Then, beginning in the 9th century, Arab forces from North Africa and the Middle East began to settle in Sicily and southern parts of the mainland. While their genetic contribution was relatively limited, estimated at around 5 to 10% in Sicily, these settlers left behind a cultural and genetic legacy that can still be observed today. By the 11th century, another wave of newcomers arrived, the Normans. Descended from Norse Vikings who had settled in France, the Normans conquered Sicily and southern Italy, creating the Norman Kingdom of Sicily. DNA evidence shows that the Normans introduced new genetic markers, particularly in western Sicily, where up to 20% of the male population carries Norman-associated Y-DNA haplogroups. This genetic influx highlights how interconnected medieval Italy was with the broader European world. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of this period is how certain regions of Italy managed to preserve their ancient genetic profiles despite these migrations. Sardinia, for instance, remained largely insulated from the genetic shifts occurring on the mainland. Its isolated position in the Mediterranean allowed the Sardinian population to retain a genetic signature dominated by Neolithic ancestry, making it a living time capsule of Europe's prehistoric past. Meanwhile, other parts of Italy became genetic bridges between different regions. Southern Italy, for example, shows a blend of influences from the Eastern Mediterranean, North Africa, and the Balkans, reflecting its role as a crossroads of trade and migration. Northern Italy, on the other hand, retained stronger genetic ties to Central and Western Europe, consistent with the migrations of Germanic tribes and later connections to neighboring regions like France and Switzerland. The genetic story of the Middle Ages doesn't just reveal the movement of people. It also highlights the resilience of Italy's genetic diversity. Despite waves of invasions, migrations, and even foreign rule, the core components of Italian DNA, rooted in its ancient past, continued to endure. This remarkable continuity, combined with the contributions of new groups, has made Italian DNA one of the most diverse and unique in Europe. As we move closer to modern times, the genetic story of Italy becomes even richer, with the effects of migration and cultural exchange continuing to shape its people. The Middle Ages were a crucial chapter in this story, adding depth and complexity to the already intricate genetic tapestry of the Italian peninsula. Today, the genetic landscape of Italy is a fascinating blend of ancient history and regional diversity. Modern Italians carry the legacies of thousands of years of migrations, invasions, and cultural exchanges, making their DNA uniquely complex. But what exactly sets Italian DNA apart? One of the most striking features of Italian genetics is the regional variation that mirrors the geography of the peninsula. Northern Italians, for instance, show a genetic closeness to populations from Western and Central Europe, such as the French and Germans. This connection reflects the historical migrations of groups like the Celts and Germanic tribes, as well as the long-standing cultural and trade relationships with neighboring regions. In contrast, Southern Italians share more genetic similarities with populations from the Eastern Mediterranean, including modern Greeks. This is a direct result of the Greek colonization of Magna Graecia during the Iron Age, as well as later influences from the Byzantine Empire and Arab settlers. Southern Italians also show small but significant traces of North African ancestry, particularly in Sicily, which reflects the island's historical connections to Phoenicians, Carthaginians, and Saracens. Central Italy acts as a genetic bridge, blending traits from both the north and south. Studies show that this region has served as a corridor for migration and cultural exchange throughout history, resulting in a unique genetic profile that ties together the diverse influences of the peninsula. And then there's Sardinia, a genetic outlier not only in Italy but in all of Europe. Sardinians have remained relatively isolated for thousands of years, preserving a genetic profile that closely resembles Europe's early Neolithic farmers. This makes Sardinia a key region for studying the ancient genetic history of Europe. But what about specific genetic markers? One of the most common Y-DNA haplogroups in Italy is R1b, particularly its U152 subclade, which is prevalent in northern and central Italy. This haplogroup is associated with the spread of Indo-European languages and reflects the genetic influence of the Proto-Villanovan and later Italic tribes. In southern Italy, haplogroups like J2 are more common, linking the region to the Eastern Mediterranean and the Near East. Mitochondrial DNA, which traces maternal ancestry, reveals equally fascinating patterns. Haplogroup H, the most common in Europe, is widespread throughout Italy, reflecting its deep ties to Europe's prehistoric past. Meanwhile, rare haplogroups like U5, which date back to the Mesolithic period, are still found in certain regions, highlighting the incredible genetic continuity in parts of Italy. What's particularly remarkable about Italian DNA is its resilience. Despite centuries of migrations, conquests, and cultural shifts, studies show that many regions of Italy have maintained a surprising level of genetic continuity. For example, modern populations in Tuscany and Umbria closely resemble their ancient counterparts, with genetic ties stretching back to the Etruscans and even earlier. This continuity doesn't mean that Italian DNA is static, it's a dynamic reflection of history. Each wave of migration, from the ancient Greeks to the medieval Normans, has added new layers to the genetic tapestry, creating a unique blend of ancient and modern influences. In fact, Italian DNA serves as a bridge between different parts of Europe and the Mediterranean. It connects the prehistoric hunter-gatherers of Europe to the early farmers of Anatolia, the Indo-European migrations from the steppe, and the vibrant cultural exchanges of the Roman and Byzantine empires. It's this intricate web of connections that makes Italian DNA so extraordinary. Ultimately, the genetic diversity of modern Italians is a testament to the history of the Italian peninsula. It's a story of resilience, adaptation, and the enduring legacy of the people who have called Italy home for tens of thousands of years. The story of Italian DNA has fascinated scientists for decades, but recent advances in genetic research have uncovered details that were once impossible to imagine. From ancient DNA extraction to genome-wide studies, these breakthroughs have shed light on the complex and unique genetic history of Italy. One of the most significant discoveries comes from the analysis of ancient DNA. For centuries, the origins of groups like the Etruscans or the genetic impact of the Roman Empire were topics of intense debate. But now, with DNA extracted from ancient remains, researchers have found answers that paint a clearer picture. Take, for example, the Etruscans. Long considered enigmatic, this pre-Roman civilization was the subject of conflicting theories about their origins. Did they come from Anatolia? Or were they indigenous to Italy? Studies of Etruscan DNA from burial sites in Tuscany and Lazio revealed a surprising truth. The Etruscans were genetically similar to their Italic neighbors, like the Latins. This suggests that their culture was uniquely their own, but their ancestry was deeply rooted in the Italian peninsula. Similarly, DNA from ancient Roman skeletons has revealed the incredible diversity of the empire. In the early Republican period, Roman citizens shared genetic similarities with modern northern and central Italians. However, during the height of the empire, the genetic profile of Rome shifted dramatically, reflecting the city's role as a global hub. People from the Eastern Mediterranean, North Africa, and beyond became part of the Roman population, creating a genetic mosaic unmatched anywhere else in the ancient world. One of the most intriguing findings involves Sardinia. Genetic studies have consistently shown that Sardinians are unique, not just within Italy but across Europe. Sardinia's isolated geography has preserved a genetic signature closely linked to Europe's first Neolithic farmers. Scientists even use Sardinian DNA as a reference when studying ancient populations, making it a key to unlocking Europe's genetic history. Beyond ancient DNA, genome-wide studies of modern Italians have provided fascinating insights into how Italy's genetic diversity reflects its history. For instance, scientists have identified a north-to-south genetic line, where populations gradually shift from a Central European influence in the north to a more Mediterranean profile in the south. Central Italy, meanwhile, acts as a genetic bridge, blending traits from both regions. These studies have also highlighted some unexpected connections. Modern southern Italians, for example, share significant genetic similarities with the people of Greece and Cyprus, while northern Italians show closer ties to populations in France and Switzerland. Sardinians, on the other hand, stand apart as genetic outliers, representing a deep link to Europe's prehistoric past. Another major breakthrough has been the use of advanced admixture models, which reveal how different ancestral components contributed to the modern Italian genome. These models show that Italians carry genetic traces of Europe's earliest hunter-gatherers, Neolithic farmers from Anatolia, Indo-European pastoralists from the steppe, and even later groups like the Phoenicians and Normans. In southern Italy, there's also a detectable influence from North Africa and the Levant, reflecting centuries of trade and migration. Perhaps one of the most exciting aspects of this research is how it connects Italy's genetic story to broader questions about human history. Studies of Italian DNA have helped scientists understand the spread of farming in Europe, the movements of Indo-European-speaking populations, and the impact of the Roman Empire on global migration patterns. Italian DNA isn't just a story of the past, it's a window into the evolution of humanity itself. As researchers continue to study ancient and modern samples, they are uncovering new details that deepen our understanding of Italy's unique genetic legacy. From the Neolithic villages of Sardinia to the bustling streets of Imperial Rome, every breakthrough brings us closer to understanding what makes Italian DNA so extraordinary. So, what makes Italian DNA stand out as truly unique? The answer lies in its unparalleled combination of continuity, diversity, and resilience. Italy's genetic history is not just a story of one people or one time period. It's the story of thousands of years of human movement, adaptation, and survival, all converging on one remarkable peninsula. Geography plays a key role in this uniqueness. Italy's location at the crossroads of Europe, the Mediterranean, and the Near East has made it a natural hub for migrations and cultural exchanges. For millennia, it has acted as both a gateway and a barrier, with its mountainous spine and long coastline shaping the movement of people. This geographic complexity helped create distinct regional genetic profiles while allowing for connections to a wider world. Another crucial factor is the sheer depth of Italy's genetic timeline. From the Paleolithic hunters who roamed the caves of Fumane to the Neolithic farmers who brought agriculture to Europe, Italy has been home to every major wave of human settlement in the region. These ancient populations didn't disappear. They became part of the genetic fabric of modern Italians, blending with newcomers while retaining traces of their original ancestry. What's equally impressive is the continuity in certain regions. Sardinia, for example, preserves a genetic profile that is nearly frozen in time, offering a glimpse into the lives of Europe's earliest farmers. Similarly, studies show that populations in Tuscany, Umbria, and other parts of central Italy have remained remarkably similar to their ancient ancestors, including the Etruscans. But Italy's DNA isn't just about continuity. It's also a testament to diversity. Over the centuries, Italy has absorbed genetic contributions from some of the most influential civilizations in history. From the Greeks who colonized Magna Graecia to the Phoenicians and Saracens who settled in Sicily, each group left a distinct genetic footprint. The Roman Empire, in particular, brought an unparalleled level of diversity, introducing genetic influences from North Africa, the Levant, and even further afield. Yet, despite this diversity, Italian DNA maintains a remarkable sense of cohesion. It reflects a balance between ancient roots and external influences, creating a genetic profile that is as complex as it is cohesive. Modern Italians are a living testament to this balance, a people who carry the legacy of prehistoric Europe, the innovation of Neolithic farmers, the ambition of the Roman Empire, and the cultural richness of the Mediterranean world. Italian DNA is also a bridge between the ancient and the modern, connecting Europe's deep genetic history with the broader human story. The genetic markers found in Italians provide clues about the spread of languages, technologies, and even diseases. They reveal how humans adapted to changing climates, navigated the challenges of migration, and forged connections across continents. In many ways, the uniqueness of Italian DNA mirrors the uniqueness of Italy itself. It's a land where ancient traditions coexist with modern innovation, where diversity is celebrated, and where history is etched into every stone and every genome. As scientists continue to uncover the secrets of Italian genetics, one thing becomes clear. Italian DNA is not just about the past. It's a story of resilience and connection, a testament to the enduring power of human migration and the richness it brings to our shared history. So, the next time you think about Italy, remember that its beauty isn't just in its art, food, or landscapes. It's in its people, each one carrying a genetic legacy that is as diverse and extraordinary as the country itself.